Happy Friday. Here is our daily Stoic reading from the Daily Stoic, 366 Meditations on Wisdom and Perseverance. Wisdom, Perseverance, and the Art of Living by Ryan Holiday. Oh, and Stephen Hanselman. I was not giving him credit before. So today is April 19th. Its title is Our Sphere of Impulses, which I usually think of sphere of influence, but sphere of impulses. Quote from Marcus Aurelius. Epictetus says we must discover the missing part. Let me restart. Epictetus says we must discover the missing art of ascent and pay special attention to the sphere of our impulses, that they are subject to reservation to the common good, and that they are in proportion to actual worth. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations 1137. And then it goes on to describe it further. This is either Ryan or Stephen, or a combination of both. Here we have the emperor, the most powerful man in the world, quoting in his diary the wisdom of a former slave. And from what we know, Marcus might have had direct quotes from Epictetus's lectures via one of his former students. That wisdom was ultimately about surrender and serving the common good, about the limits of our power and the importance of checking our impulses, something every person in authority needs to hear. Power and powerlessness seem so rarely to enter the same orbit, but when they do, it can change the world. Think about President Abraham Lincoln meeting with, corresponding with, and learning from Frederick Douglass, another former slave of considerable wisdom and insight. So in this piece, it's likening Marcus Aurelius to Lincoln and Epictetus to Frederick Douglass. In any case, all those men lived by the principles expressed here, that in our lives, whether we're experiencing great power or powerlessness, it's critical to leave room for what may happen and keep the common good and the actual worth of things front and center. And above all, be willing to learn from anyone and everyone, regardless of their station in life. Okay, so I have to chew on that one a little bit. So I understand what they're highlighting here as far as Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, is writing in his journal. And he is writing about being inspired by a wisdom, a truth that was written down from Epictetus. And what this is highlighting is that Epictetus was a former slave and goes on to be a great Stoic scholar, etc. And how we can learn so much from those who are without power, and those in power have as much to learn from those without power as those without power can learn from those who have power. I might be spinning around the mulberry bush on this one. So what is it saying about impulses? I'm going to read the quote again. Epictetus says we must discover the missing art of ascent. The missing art of ascent. Ascent. Ascent as in rising in station, or ascent as in accepting? And pay special attention to the sphere of our impulses, that they are subject to reservation to the common good, and that they are in proportion to actual worth. Oh, okay. So we all have impulses, every moment of every day. And what we have control over is checking those impulses. Is this for the common good? Is this balanced? And is this in proportion to its actual worth? So, yes, you can have a fun impulse to run off to Disneyland all of a sudden this weekend. But is this in balance to your responsibilities at home and to your family? Is it in good reservation of your resources and your time? And does it serve any common good? Of course, we are allowed those great joys in life. And I don't know why that was my example, but there's my example. But it's important, coming from an emperor who has so many to be responsible for, to take and understand this wisdom from somebody who didn't have these choices, who wasn't able to go off on their impulses and be frivolous and to be indulgent. So this is really interesting. So I'm going to read again what the breakdown is. Here we have the emperor, the most powerful man in the world, quoting in his diary the wisdom of a former slave, and from what we know, Marcus might have had direct quotes from Epictetus's lectures via one of his former students, I guess a former student of Epictetus. That wisdom was ultimately about surrender and serving the common good, about the limits of our power and the importance of checking our impulses. The limits of our power and checking our impulses. Oh, okay. So this is interesting to me because as a leader and as somebody that others look to, my impulses can have great power and cost to not only myself, but others around me. And we're all leaders in some way in our world, whether it's for our home, our family, our community, etc. And it's important that every person in authority needs to hear this, to check your impulses. And what do you check it against? What's your measure? Is this in good balance? Is this serving the common good? What was the other one? And is it in proportion to the actual worth? Oh, so I can have this great impulse to run off and be like, I'm going to create this amazing program that's going to help people and it's going to do all these things. And I can run off and do the work. But if I don't weigh the worth of it, I could be wasting my energy and I could be wasting the time and the potential and the hope of others. So it's important to check your impulses, that they are of good value, that they have a service to the common good, and that they are measured and not just acted upon, to take that pulse of energy and to ensure that it is against the measure of who you are and what you need to be doing for the world and yourself. Power and powerlessness seem so rarely to enter the same orbit, but when they do, it can change the world. Think about President Abraham Lincoln meeting with, corresponding with, and learning from Frederick Douglass, another former slave of considerable wisdom and insight. In any case, all those men lived by the principles expressed here, that in our lives, whether we're experiencing great power or powerlessness, it's critical to leave room for what may happen and keep the common good and the actual worth of things front and center. And above all, be willing to learn from anyone and everyone, regardless of their station in life. That's really interesting. So I've been reading this book for a couple days now. You know, it's once a page a day. And it started with no harm, no foul. And then it goes on to opinions, which I'm very familiar with my opinions and how they help and hinder me. And those things are easier to chew on. This sphere of impulses is catching on me a little bit, which tells me there's a lot of wisdom here for me to gain. So I'm grateful for this moment with you in this afternoon. And I'm grateful for Marcus Aurelius, and I'm grateful for Epictetus, and I'm so glad that they wrote down these wisdoms. And I'm grateful to Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman, who continue to write about these ideas so that we may explore them and continue to see them reflected in our world. This has been April 19th, reading from the Daily Stoic, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Blessed be.